called him mad. A billionaire with only 3 months to live who gave up boardrooms and billion-dollar deals to adopt 5 street kids he'd never met. Why would a dying man choose chaos over comfort? What could he possibly see in 5 broken boys the world had already forgotten? And, more importantly, what did they see in him? Was this a final act of desperation or the beginning of something far bigger than any of them imagined, in a world obsessed with power, legacy, and control? Can a man on the brink of death rediscover what it truly means to live through 5 children who had every reason to give up? This is not a story about charity. It's not about saving them. It's about how they saved him. If you believe in second chances, found families, and the power of unexpected love, then this story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin. They laughed when they heard that a dying millionaire was adopting 5 homeless boys. No one expected that fate was ready to turn everything upside down. The pale yellow envelope lay still on Nathaniel Cross's walnut desk, fragile-looking, yet casting a long shadow across the room. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows on the 61st floor of a skyscraper in the heart of Cavendish City, the city still sparkled like a giant jewelry box, completely unaware of what lay inside that envelope. 3 months, Nathaniel whispered, breaking the suffocating silence that had lingered since his private doctor left. 3 months to live. The words hung in the air, heavy as the priceless paintings on the walls. At 58, Nathaniel Cross had built a global financial empire. The logo of Cross and Wynn Capital had become a financial symbol in 14 countries. His fortune was enough to make a small country envious. But now, it all meant nothing, just numbers. He silently loosened his silk tie and poured himself a glass of 35-year-old scotch, something that once made him feel like royalty, but now tasted like ashes. "What legacy am I leaving behind?" he murmured, his hoarse voice echoing in the empty room, sounding unfamiliar even to himself. His late wife, Elena, had also succumbed to that cruel disease 5 years ago. They had never had children, always busy, always thinking. There will be time later. Now, there was no later. He stepped to the window and looked down at the rushing people below, scurrying like ants. How many of them were hurrying home to family? How many had someone waiting for them? The thought crashed over him like a giant wave, dragging him back to memories he thought he had buried. As a child, he lived cramped in a run-down apartment in the poor district of Oak Ridge. His mother worked 3 jobs to support him after his father left. A scholarship was the only ticket out. From then on, he threw himself into studies and work, vowing never to be weak again, never to need anyone. And he had succeeded, brilliantly, but also heartbreakingly. The phone vibrated another board meeting, another acquisition, another profit that would soon belong to distant relatives he barely spoke to. Nathaniel Cross, once called the master of the game, was now simply counting down the days. He set the glass down and adjusted his collar. The cold, composed face of a brilliant leader returned like a mask. But something had cracked inside him, a quiet but deep fracture. He stepped into the elevator. In his heart, a silent vow was made. The days I have left must mean something, even if I don't know how yet. The charity gala buzzed with artificial chatter. Nathaniel felt suffocated by the glances, some pitiful, others scrutinizing. The diagnosis had leaked, and he felt like a stock about to crash. Take the shortcut home. Gregory, he told his driver, turn right. The limousine turned into a narrow alley, its headlights sweeping past shuttered stores. As the car slowed near a dark corner, Nathaniel noticed movement in the shadows. Stop the car. Just a moment. Ignoring his driver's protests, he opened the door and stepped out, the cold December wind slapping his face. The evening news had said there might be snow. He walked toward the darkness. Italian leather shoes tapping against the cement. Under the weak glow of a street light, 5 small figures emerged, children curled up in cardboard and old newspapers. The oldest looked about 15. The youngest couldn't be more than 7. They all sprang up instantly, alert like small wild animals. Easy, Nathaniel said, raising both hands. I'm not the police. The oldest boy stepped forward protectively. We didn't do anything wrong. This is private property. But the owner said we could stay here until construction starts. Nathaniel noticed a strange orderliness to their makeshift shelter. Everything was carefully arranged. There was a light in their eyes, especially the oldest and the youngest. What are your names? He asked. Silence. Then the oldest spoke. I'm Jace. That's Braden and Brody, he said, pointing at 2 identical boys, around 13. Over there is Micah, the skinny boy with the artist's hands, around 11. And the little one is Finn, brothers Nathaniel asked. Not by blood, Jace replied. Circumstance. Something stirred inside him, a feeling he thought was long dead, a strange, overwhelming urge. Snow's coming, he said. I have a house nearby. Warm beds, hot food. Instant suspicion filled their eyes. No strings attached, he added. Just one night. It's the holiday season, after all. They huddled and whispered among themselves. Gregory watched the scene through the car window, stunned. Finally, Jace nodded. One night. We stay together. We can leave any time. Deal, Nathaniel said. 20 minutes later, Nathaniel Cross, who had never even owned a pet, stood silently as 5 strange boys tiptoed into his luxurious penthouse. They clustered in the massive living room, eyes wide as they took everything in. The fridge is full, he said. Bedrooms are that way. Bathrooms are stocked. I'll be in my study if you need anything. He turned to leave when a small voice piped up Finn. Why are you doing this? Nathaniel paused. That question he had no clear answer. He simply replied, because I can. But as he sat down in his study, hearing the distant sound of Giggle's laughter echoing through a house that had long been cold, a thought began to form. An idea so crazy that even he couldn't believe he was considering it. Tomorrow, he would call his lawyer. There was something in the children's eyes, especially the oldest and the youngest, that struck Nathaniel as different. What are your names? He asked, his voice soft as the wind. A slow silence passed. Then the eldest boy spoke. I'm Jace. The twins are Braden and Brody, he said, pointing at the 2 identical boys, about 13 years old. That one is Micah, 11, really good with his hands, and the little one is Finn. Are you brothers? Nathaniel asked. Not by blood, Jace replied. We're brothers by circumstance. Something stirred in Nathaniel's heart, something he thought had gone cold long ago. An irrational yet powerful urge rose within him. It's going to snow, he said. My home's nearby. Warm beds, hot food. Suspicion was clear in their eyes. No strings attached, he added, firmly. Just one night. It's Christmas season, after all. The group huddled and whispered to each other while Nathaniel stood waiting patiently. From inside the car, Gregory, his driver, looked on in disbelief. Finally, Jace looked up. "Just one night. We stay together. We can leave at any time." "Agreed." Nathaniel nodded. 20 minutes later, Nathaniel Cross, a man who'd never managed to care for a goldfish, stood watching 5 street boys cautiously step into his opulent penthouse. They huddled close together, wide-eyed at the crystal chandeliers and velvet-covered chairs. "The fridge is stocked," he said, pointing toward the kitchen. "Bedrooms are down the hall. Bathrooms have everything you need. I'll be in my study. If you need anything, just ask." He had just turned away when a soft voice spoke Finn, the youngest. "Why are you doing this?" Nathaniel paused, a question even he didn't quite have the answer to. At last, he replied, "Because I can." But that night, as he sat alone in his study, listening to the light footsteps, the soft murmurs filling a house that had once been hauntingly silent, Nathaniel began to consider something crazy, a plan so far-fetched, even he could hardly believe he was thinking it. Tomorrow, he thought, I'll call the lawyer. Nathaniel's mansion in Cavendish City had always been just for show, always spotless, always by the book, but completely lifeless. Now, the laughter of children echoed through the marble hallways, around the expensive furniture. "You've lost your mind," muttered Harvey Langston, his lawyer of over 2 decades, standing at the doorway of the study and looking out at the kids playing. Taking them in temporarily is one thing, but adopting them. All 5. With your condition, Nathaniel said nothing, simply watching. Braden and Brody were tinkering with an old speaker like 2 little engineers. Micah was sketching the pattern of an antique vase with his left hand. Jace was silently noting every emergency exit and valuable item in the room. And Finn, like a little sponge, was absorbing every detail. "Precisely because I'm sick. Harvey," Nathaniel said, "start the paperwork." Day 3 passed in chaos. The kids broke a priceless vase while playing in the hallway. Nathaniel lost his temper and yelled. Silence fell like a curtain, not a single word in reply. That afternoon, Jace initiated a communication strike. Not one of them spoke to him for hours. On the 4th night, Nathaniel found Finn fumbling at the locked door of the study. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply. The boy jumped. I just wanted to look at the books, but..." "You could have asked," Nathaniel said, reaching for the key. Finn lowered his eyes. "Grown-ups usually don't say yes to us." The answer stopped Nathaniel cold. He unlocked the door. "Well, now, this grown-up says yes. Come in." Finn's eyes lit up as he stepped into the vast library, when Nathaniel reminded him it was late and he should go to bed. Finn shyly asked, "Can I take one book back with me?" "You can read," Nathaniel asked. Surprised, "Jace taught all of us. He says knowledge lasts longer than money," Finn said proudly. Nathaniel smiled and handed him a children's astronomy book. "Start with this one." The first weekend passed. Life in the mansion was beginning to find a rhythm, chaotic, awkward, but a rhythm nonetheless. The kids kept testing the boundaries. One evening, Nathaniel arranged a formal dinner, but within 10 minutes, Micah pushed his plate of salmon aside, face wrinkled in displeasure. "I don't eat this stuff." "You eat what's served," Nathaniel said sternly. "We never asked to stay here," Jace interjected, his tone cold as steel. Nathaniel gripped the knife in his hand. "But you're here clean clothes, a roof over your heads." Silence fell over the table. Then Finn spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Last time someone gave us free food, the next morning, they called the cops. The air seemed to freeze." Nathaniel put down his utensils. "That won't happen here," he said in a low voice. Finn nodded slowly. "I know you're sick. You need us. More than we need you." Nathaniel stared at him. "How do you know?" Finn didn't flinch. "Your medicine cabinet, the way you walk, the papers you hide when we enter the room." The other boys said nothing, but their eyes said it all they knew. "You said I'm sick?" Nathaniel asked, his voice soft as mist. Finn nodded. "The medicine cabinet in the bathroom. The way you lean slightly when you walk. Those papers you hurried to hide when we walked in." He shrugged. "Adults think kids don't notice stuff." The other boys glanced at each other, silent but not surprised. They knew. They had known for a while. "So, is that why you stayed?" Nathaniel asked, this time addressing all of them. Out of pity, Jace replied, his eyes hardened by the streets suddenly softening. "No, we stayed because you're the first person who didn't expect anything from us, even though you're dying." The words hit Nathaniel square in the chest, not because they hurt, but because they were so raw, so true. They shattered the walls he had spent a lifetime building. He laughed a real laugh, unguarded, unforced, the first in years. "At least, now we're being honest with each other," he said, his eyes flickering with a warmth that even surprised him. That night, for the first time, the mansion felt less like a monument and more like a home. Nathaniel lay awake in bed, listening to the soft footsteps and quiet whispers in the hallway, the sounds of life, of warmth, terrifying, but also beautiful. The news spread faster than he expected. Terminally ill millionaire adopts 5 homeless children. The headline blared across the front page of the Cavendish Financial Times. The next morning, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. Calls from journalists, the board of directors, investors, even people who had never bothered to remember his name. "Don't mind them," Nathaniel said to a staff member as he adjusted Finn's bow tie, preparing for the Children's Hospital fundraising gala. All 5 boys stood still in tailored suits, still carrying the air of the streets beneath their polished clothes. "Do we have to go there?" Brody grumbled, tugging at his stiff collar. "Because it matters," Nathaniel replied calmly. "And because everyone's talking about us," Jace added, unable to hide the edge in his voice. Nathaniel met his eyes. "Yes, and I want them to see what I see." The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Kingsbury Hotel sparkled under crystal chandeliers, a gathering of Cavendish City's elite. When Nathaniel walked in with the 5 boys, the room fell silent, as if holding its breath. Then came the murmurs, hidden behind champagne flutes and plastic smiles. "Cross has finally lost it. Sickness really does make people insane. Just a dying man's PR stunt. Those kids will tear his fortune apart." Curtis Blackwell, Nathaniel's longtime rival and CEO of Blackwell Holdings, approached with a smile as sharp as a knife. "Nathaniel, you're truly generous bringing your whole charity project along." Jace's hand clenched at the word project. Nathaniel noticed immediately and replied calmly, "They're my children. Curtis, not a project." Curtis's smile never reached his eyes. "Of course, though I wonder if the Cross and Wind Capital Board shares your paternal enthusiasm, especially with your health failing." "My health is none of your concern," Nathaniel said coolly. Curtis turned his attention elsewhere. He bent down slightly, eyeing the boys like merchandise. And what about these little street entrepreneurs taking an interest in high finance, seeing anything worth pocketing? Yet Nathaniel was about to speak, but Jace stepped forward. "Sir, I read Mr. Cross's last quarterly report. Your company's debt-to-equity ratio appears quite alarming compared to industry benchmarks." The room fell dead silent. Curtis's face turned red. "Watch your mouth, kid. You don't belong here," Jace replied evenly. "Neither does your portfolio performance. It doesn't fit in." A diamond-drenched woman gasped. Curtis clenched his fists as if about to strike. Nathaniel stepped between them. "My son has a knack for numbers," he said, emphasizing my son. "Maybe you should listen." Curtis sneered. "Your kids seem good at manipulation. Everyone sees what's going on here. You're dying, Cross, and these street rats are conning you into handing over everything you built." Braden lunged forward, but Brody grabbed his brother's shoulder. "Don't talk about him like that," he growled through gritted teeth. The room went still, all eyes fixed on them. "I think," Nathaniel said, his voice full of authority, "it's time we left." He turned. "Come on, boys," as they walked past the frozen crowd. Finn suddenly stopped. He turned to face Curtis Blackwell and then the entire room. "You think we're using him because he's dying?" His voice rang out, clear and sharp like a bell. "But it's you who left him when he needed someone the most." The truth hit the room like shattered glass, sparkling and cold. Not a soul spoke as Nathaniel Cross led his children out of that glittering, empty room. Inside the limousine, leaving the gala, Nathaniel sat silently, bracing himself for anger or tears from the boys. But to his surprise, the group remained quiet. It wasn't until Micah finally asked, in an even voice, "Do you care what they think?" Nathaniel paused in thought. "I used to," he said honestly. Then he turned to look at the 5 boys not as homeless children anymore, but as sons. Brave boys who stood up for him, for who he was, not what he had. And then it struck him like lightning. "Now, what I care about is what you think." In the car, glances were exchanged, silent looks in a language only street kids understood. Finally, Jace spoke on behalf of them all. "Then I guess we think we have to face the world together." He said it simply. "And we're not going to lose." Nathaniel Cross had never been one to accept defeat. The humiliation at the fundraising gala hadn't broken him. It had ignited something stronger determination. A week later, over breakfast, he announced, "We're hosting a dinner. The most powerful people in Cavendish City will be invited." The boys exchanged skeptical glances. "What for?" Micah asked, awkwardly adjusting his silverware. "They made it clear they don't like us," Brody added. "Because," Nathaniel explained, "in this world, respect isn't given freely. Sometimes you have to make people realize they were wrong." The next 2 weeks, the mansion turned into a full-fledged training camp. Nathaniel hired none other than Madame Beaulieu, a famously strict French etiquette coach who carried a pointer stick and had the demeanor of a drill sergeant. She turned every meal into a lesson. Back straight, Finn, knife in the right hand. Brody. "Don't reach." Braden asked for the salt. The kids groaned their way through lessons on greetings, small talk, and memorizing bios of every expected guest. Nathaniel silently watched the transformation these once wild street boys now carried themselves like young gentlemen of the elite. One evening, during the final rehearsal, Jace grumbled while adjusting his suit sleeves. "This is stupid. No matter how well we do, they'll never accept us." Nathaniel nodded slightly and replied, "It's not about being accepted. It's about self-respect, proving you belong in any room you choose to walk into." The night of the dinner arrived. The Cross mansion glowed like a palace. Imported floral arrangements adorned every table. A world-renowned chef had crafted a delicate 7-course meal. The clock struck 7, then 7:30, and by 8 p.m., only 6 couples had arrived out of 30 invitations. Nathaniel looked around and knew this wasn't a traffic issue. This was calculated disrespect. His housekeeper murmured, "Perhaps it's traffic, sir." But her eyes betrayed her discomfort. The few guests who had arrived made their disdain clear. When the boys approached, conversations halted. All questions were directed at Nathaniel, as if the children were invisible. When Micah accidentally knocked over a glass of water, soft scoffs rippled through the room. And then came the tipping point. During dessert, Regina Whitford, the wife of a major investor, accidentally spilled a glass of red wine on Micah's pristine suit. "Oh dear," she said, with no real remorse. "Clumsy me. But such fine fabric is wasted on those unfamiliar with using it." Nathaniel caught the flash of hurt in Micah's eyes right before the boy hid it behind the familiar, emotionless mask he wore when people looked down on him. Before Nathaniel could respond, he overheard Mr. Whitford whispering to another guest, "Cross's little charity circus is fascinating. Let's see how long these rats drain him dry." The room froze. Nathaniel looked around the elite faces, smiling politely, eyes dripping with quiet contempt behind their crystal glasses. Then he looked at the 5 boys. They were trying to fit in, to be acknowledged, to be seen in a world that should have welcomed them. Something inside Nathaniel Cross, once a ruthless titan who never hesitated to crush rivals suddenly, cracked and was reborn. He stood up and tapped his glass gently. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice steady but his eyes brimming with emotion. "Your presence has been an education for my sons, and for me." Nathaniel scanned the dinner table, meeting the puzzled and uneasy eyes of his guests. "I invited you here because I once thought that I and my children needed your approval," he said, his tone calm and even. He gently placed a hand on Finn's shoulder, a quiet touch filled with trust. "I was wrong. Tonight showed me that the most expensive suits in Cavendish City often hide the most ordinary souls." A ripple of shock swept through the room. Subtle gasps, glasses frozen mid-air. "This dinner is over," Nathaniel announced. "Gregory will see you out." When the doors closed behind the stunned and resentful faces, 6 people remained at the long, now cold table. The gourmet meal hadn't touched a single heart. "Did we fail?" Finn asked softly, his voice almost a whisper. Nathaniel looked at the young faces before him, their eyes cast downward, filled with the sting of hope unmet. A new feeling stirred inside him, protectiveness, not for his assets, but for these fragile lives. "No," he said firmly. "They failed. They couldn't see what I see." "What is that?" Brody asked, eyes still searching for something. Nathaniel smiled, his voice softening like spring air. 5 extraordinary boys who have survived extraordinary circumstances, who deserve extraordinary opportunities." He paused, then added, with unwavering conviction, "and we'll make those opportunities ourselves." For the first time since stepping into the mansion, all 5 boys smiled back at him, A small moment, but more meaningful than any billion-dollar deal he'd ever signed. The Cross Mansion began to change, not a museum of wealth anymore, but a true home. The man who used to delegate everything now did things with his own hands, not out of necessity, but because he wanted connection. The formal living room transformed into a cozy family space with a big sofa and warm golden light. The once unused designer kitchen was expanded to fit 6 people, cooking or more often. Reckon it together. That's the 3rd time the fire alarm's gone off. Braden laughed, throwing open a window after a lasagna disaster. At this rate, the fire department's gonna know us by name, Brody added, his face smeared with sauce. Even Nathaniel chuckled a laugh that came easily, naturally, a laugh this house had forgotten long ago. Over time, the boys' unique personalities began to shine through like sunlight after a storm. One quiet afternoon, Nathaniel found Jace deeply focused on financial reports at his desk. "You understand all of that?" he asked. Part surprised, part impressed, Jace didn't look up. "Yeah, the numbers make sense. It's people that don't, most of the time." Nathaniel reached out to an old friend, a math prodigy who had once left Wall Street to personally mentor Jace. No one expected how far the boy would go, easily surpassing former industry experts. Another day, passing his study. Nathaniel caught the twins taking apart his backup laptop. "We can fix it," Braden said quickly. "We were going to put it back together." Brody chimed in. Nathaniel simply smiled. "I'm counting on you. Anyway, the East Wing Tech Lab is yours now." Micah, the quietest one, began turning scrap paper into vivid sketches, shapes, emotions, and details with startling precision. Nathaniel hired a renowned artist as his mentor. After each lesson, Micah drew more, spoke more, and believed in himself a little more. And Finn, the youngest, spent hours in the library. One late night, Nathaniel found him nestled among thick medical books. He picked one up, startled. "You can read all this?" Finn nodded. "Most of it. The human body is like a machine. If you understand the parts, you can fix it." Nathaniel squinted. "What are you trying to fix?" The boy looked up, dead serious. You're broken, but you can be fixed." The simplicity of it hit Nathaniel deeper than any speech ever could. His health continued to decline. Fatigue stretched longer. The pain required stronger medicine. He had prepared for the worst. The adoption papers were complete. The will had been updated. His lawyer assured him all 5 children would be taken care of. He had accepted that, until that night. That night, Nathaniel picked up the phone. Medical experts from across the globe were contacted. By morning, a specialized team of tutors was assembled not just to teach general knowledge, but to cultivate each child's unique talents. The Cross Mansion was no longer quiet. It was alive, vibrant, bustling, and full of purpose. From the hallways came the chatter of financial theory. From the courtyard, the bounce of basketballs. The former study was now a miniature research center. One evening, Jace found Nathaniel reading over the new education plans, weary but focused. "Why are you doing all this?" Jace asked quietly. Nathaniel put down his pen. Once, he had no answer, but now he did. "Because time is the most precious thing in the world," he said slowly, "and I want to give all that I have left to you." Nathaniel sat quietly at the table, eyes fixed on the education plans the boys had drawn up, despite the growing fatigue etched into his face. "Why are you doing all this?" Jace asked from the doorway. concern in his eyes. 3 months ago, Nathaniel wouldn't have known how to answer. But now, only 3 words were needed because time matters. He looked straight into the boy's eyes, his voice honest and simple. And I want to give what I have left to all of you. What he didn't say, what he couldn't say, was that these 5 street boys had awakened something inside him that he thought had died with Elena hope, purpose, and a fragile belief that he'd finally found something worth fighting for. That night, Nathaniel couldn't sleep. The pain was persistent. He quietly made his way to the kitchen to find medicine and water, but as he stepped into the hallway, he froze. Whispers from the library. 3 a.m. They were supposed to be asleep. He frowned, ready to scold them, but what he saw stopped him in his tracks. Under the soft glow of a reading lamp, the 5 boys sat around the large oak table. Medical journals, treatment charts, and spreadsheets covered every inch. Finn hunched over a complex diagram, pointing at a treatment pathway. This protocol needs revision. His cancer type responds better to this combo therapy. Nathaniel's eyes widened. That chart. He recognized it. It was from his own oncologist. We need to look into experimental treatments, Jace added, scribbling furiously. And we'll need money. A lot of it. We can make it. Brody jumped in, with Braden nodding. Markets move by patterns. We just have to see the big picture. At the head of the table, Micah was sketching a detailed blueprint of a medical device. Nathaniel's voice broke the air like a blade. What is going on here? All 5 heads snapped up, startled. Fear flickered in their eyes. Then, after a heavy pause, Jace slowly stood. We think we can save you." Nathaniel stood frozen. "What did you say?" Finn stepped forward, clutching a thick folder. "Your cancer. It's aggressive, but there's a treatment path your doctor hasn't tried." He looked at the file, then at each of them, his gaze dazed. "How did you even? We're not what people think." Jace cut in gently, and then they spoke. Jace explained how he taught himself finance from discarded Cavendish financial daily newspapers and developed an uncanny ability to spot market patterns. Braden and Brody had been fixing and rebuilding electronics since they were 7, taking apart junk and turning it into tools. Micah could recreate anything he'd ever seen with incredible accuracy, including medical schematics. Finn spent hours waiting in charity clinic lobbies, silently devouring the medical books people left behind, teaching himself piece by piece. "We found each other because we were all different," Jace continued. "Kids like us, if we don't stick together, we don't survive." Nathaniel slowly sank into a chair, as if the strength had drained from his body. "So, you knew who I was?" "From the start," he asked, voice hoarse. "Yes." Jace nodded. "The day you walked into that alley, we recognized you. Cross from Cross and Wynn Capital. Your face was on the finance pages the day before." Nathaniel felt a wave of disappointment crash over him like betrayal. So, all of this was a plan. Finn's small hand gently touched his. "No, we didn't plan to meet you. But once it happened, we saw an opportunity for what to do something big." Braden answered. "Your money could fund research that would take decades to happen." Brody added. "You could help us bring our ideas to life," Micah whispered. "Ideas that could save people. Like you." Nathaniel looked down at the piles of papers, the models, the data waves of calculations. invention, and determination pouring from 5 weary minds. But why, he asked, his voice caught in his throat. Why save me? Why not just wait for me to die and inherit everything? The boys glanced at one another. Then Jace stepped forward, this time without any guard in his eyes. Because you were the first person to see us, and choose to keep us. That simple answer shattered something inside Nathaniel. A great iceberg, years of cynicism, loneliness, and guardedness finally melted away. These once homeless boys, brilliant, wounded, but fiercely determined, had quietly been trying to save him, while he had only been preparing to die. "Show me everything," Nathaniel said hoarsely, wiping away a tear that had silently slipped from the corner of his eye. Dawn painted the sky over Cavendish City. In the mansion's library, 6 figures leaned close over a table, their shadows blending as one as together. They crafted a plan to challenge death itself. The next morning, Nathaniel summoned an emergency meeting with his medical team. He presented an alternative treatment plan, careful not to mention that it had come from a child. They listened with polite skepticism, the kind doctors reserve for terminal patients clinging to impossible hope. When he returned home, Finn was already waiting in the study. "They're not going to help," the boy said, his eyes no longer brimming with optimism. "They think you're desperate." "I am desperate," Nathaniel replied, collapsing into the chair. The pain these days was sharper, a constant reminder that time was slipping away. "Then we do it ourselves," Jace said firmly, no hesitation. Over the next week, Nathaniel could hardly believe how his mansion transformed. His new family, himself and 5 boys, officially began building what they called Project Phoenix. The east wing of the mansion was converted into a research lab where Finn and Micah worked on the treatment protocol. Nathaniel tapped into his global network to quietly obtain experimental drugs, things hospitals wouldn't dare authorize. Meanwhile, Jace and the twins, Braden and Brody, immersed themselves in building a market prediction algorithm, a new financial engine that could potentially reshape the company's future. Nathaniel handed over all historical data from Cross and Wynn Capital. Within days, the boys had uncovered patterns missed by his top analysts. For the first time since his diagnosis, Nathaniel felt something dangerous yet exhilarating hope. That hope didn't last long. The first sign came in the form of a call from Diane Pembroke, chairwoman of the board. "Nathaniel," she began, without preamble, "the board is concerned. The children you've adopted, your health. The shareholders are uneasy. My personal life has nothing to do with the company." Nathaniel replied coolly. "It does when the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar firm begins acting erratically while gravely ill." The next day, a second warning arrived. A social worker showed up unannounced at the mansion. She said it was a routine welfare check, but it was clearly anonymous. She inspected every corner, asked subtly loaded questions when she thought Nathaniel wasn't within earshot. She leaned down and asked Finn, "Do you feel safe here?" Finn looked her dead in the eye, steadier than any boy his age should be. "I've never felt safer." After she left, Nathaniel understood someone was watching, someone with power. The final proof came during a virtual executive meeting, just as Nathaniel finished his remarks. A screen glitch exposed an email not meant for him. The content a thread between the CFO and Curtis Blackwell. They were planning a leadership transition and a hostile takeover. That night, Nathaniel gathered his family in the library, now the secret command center. "We're under attack," Nathaniel said, eyes sharp as steel. "First, my health, the primary battle. Second, control of the company. They'll try to force me out, claiming I'm unfit. Third, the adoption. They'll question the legality, especially if outside pressure increases. And fourth," Jace added, "Phoenix. If they find out we're building a predictive financial system, they'll do everything to steal it." The twins exchanged a glance. "We checked," Braden said. "Someone's trying to breach the estate's security system, and your private server, too." Brody added, "The attack is sophisticated." Nathaniel's phone buzzed. The head of security reported, "Sir, there's unusual movement around the perimeter. Unmarked surveillance vehicles. Not police." Nathaniel sighed, then turned to the boys. "They don't know what we're doing, but they know it's something big." Micah shook his head. "But why we're just trying to cure an illness? Because what we're doing disrupts their plans." Nathaniel answered darkly, his eyes clouded with storm. "They'll question whether you're fit to be a guardian." Jace continued, his voice steady and unshaken. "And the fourth threat," he added, "is the algorithm. If they find out what we're building—" Nathaniel nodded, concern clouding his eyes. "That thing could change the entire financial industry. It's worth billions, and they'll steal it, or destroy it." Braden and Brody said in unison, "Or both," Micah added, his voice barely above a whisper, throughout the strategy meeting. Finn had remained quiet, but now, the youngest among them spoke up, his voice soft, but cutting through the tension like a knife. "We need to split the field to win." Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean you taught us about strategy?" Finn replied. "When you're outnumbered, disrupt their lines." A slow smile spread across Nathaniel's lips. "Divide their focus. Make them turn on each other." Jace understood instantly. His eyes lit up, and just like that, a plan began to form in the dead of night. The Cross family's 6 people, bound not by blood but by choice, launched a full-scale operation. Nathaniel would go public in a major philanthropic initiative, drawing media attention and distracting those tracking his every move. Simultaneously, the group would leak false strategic information, making Curtis Blackwell suspect rival stakeholders were plotting a takeover of their own. Most importantly, Project Phoenix would accelerate. Finn would begin Phase 1 of the experimental treatment. Jace and the twins would deploy the initial version of the algorithm to generate funding. "This is dangerous," Nathaniel said, his voice dropping. "For all of us. This may be our last shot if anyone wants out. I can make sure you're safe, even if I'm not here." No one answered. Instead, one by one, they placed their hands on the wooden table. No words, just that look shared only by those who've survived the streets. Jace spoke for them all. "Family doesn't walk away." Nathaniel laid his hand over theirs. His was large, weathered, covering 5 smaller but steadfast ones, once forgotten boys who once slept cold beneath winter skies were now his sons. He, once a man who thought he had lost everything, now understood connection was the greatest legacy. "Then we fight," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. No one noticed the tiny red light blinking silently on Nathaniel's phone in the corner. Someone had listened to the entire secret family meeting. The next morning, the Cross Mansion was no longer just a home. It had become a warship, a covert command center. The basement, once a storage area for wine and tech equipment, had transformed into Project Phoenix's nerve center. Alpha security mode activated, Brody announced, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Fully isolated electronics. No external connections. Braden added, signal jammers are live. No one's listening in. Nathaniel stood behind them, stunned yet quietly proud. In just 72 hours, the twins had turned the estate into a high-tech fortress using gear discreetly ordered through shell companies. Physical security's upgraded, too, Jace reported. I replaced half the staff with people unlinked to the company, and the treatment Nathaniel turned to Finn and Micah. Finn spread out a dense medical chart. Phase 1 begins today. The new protocol directly targets the cancer cells but preserves the immune system. He looked up, eyes far too deep for a boy his age. You'll feel worse before you get better. Nathaniel nodded. I trust you. Micah had repurposed the unused sunroom into a treatment center. Natural light spilled across the floor. Inside stood a hospital bed, customized equipment, precision IV lines. This device, we redesigned it. Micah pointed at the diagram. Standard therapy wastes medicine on healthy tissue. This targets only the cancer. Nathaniel lay back on the bed, rolling up his sleeve. The IV slid into his vein without a sound. Finn, with hands steady beyond his years, prepared the medication like a seasoned nurse. As the medicine began to flow through his body, Nathaniel thought, who would have imagined that my life would one day rest in the hands of a child who should still be playing make-believe. To entrust your life to a child who should be stacking building blocks, not adjusting cancer treatment protocols. It was absurd. And yet, it was the most right thing Nathaniel had ever done. Are you ready? Finn asked. The IV set and ready. Nathaniel nodded. The cool fluid began flowing into his veins. While I'm undergoing treatment, Jace will represent me at the company, he said. The board can't stop a man from mentoring his son. The treatment was brutal. For 3 days, Nathaniel drifted in and out of consciousness, fevered, writhing, numbed only by strong painkillers. All 5 boys took turns at his bedside. Sometimes they quietly debated medical numbers, sometimes they read financial reports aloud, and sometimes they just talked about their dreams, their fears, and the future. On the 4th morning, Nathaniel opened his eyes. Before him, 5 children lay slumped across the room on chairs, on the floor, leaning against each other in sleep, uncaring of comfort. The street kids were now the center of his world. Phase 1 was complete. Project Phoenix was ready to leap forward. Jace, now a familiar face at Cross and Wynn Capital, showed up daily, quietly gathering intel. That evening, at the family strategy meeting, he reported Blackwell is approaching key shareholders. He's offering a premium to buy their stakes in exchange for restructuring the board. Nathaniel smirked, which means pushing me out. He was still weak, but his mind remained sharp. The algorithm's outperforming expectations, Braden said, barely containing his pride. 18% return in just 10 days of testing, Brody added, displaying complex graphs on the secure server. We're spotting market trends before they happen, just like we theorized. How long until full deployment? Nathaniel asked. 2 weeks, maybe less. The twins answered in sync. That night, as he reviewed the results, a soft knock came at the door. The visitor was Eleanor Haynes, his executive assistant for over 2 decades. "These are the documents you requested," she said, gently placing them on the desk, her eyes flicking briefly to the medical equipment around his bed. "The board is asking questions. Blackwell is moving. Let him," Nathaniel said. "Everything is still on track." Eleanor hesitated, then asked, "These children, are they really helping your recovery?" Nathaniel looked at the woman he had trusted most in his professional life, his voice unshakable. "They're not just helping. They're saving my life." Eleanor's expression was unreadable. "I just hope you know what you're doing." After she left, something unsettled Nathaniel. He reached for his secure phone, the one he always kept by the bed. It was gone. A chill ran down his spine. The phone's disappearance triggered the emergency protocol. Braden and Brody immediately activated the tracking system. Jace began cross-checking everyone who had entered the treatment area in the past 48 hours. "Nothing," Jace reported. "The signal shows the phone is still in the mansion, but we've checked every room." "System glitch?" Nathaniel asked. "No chance," Braden replied firmly. The answer came just before dawn. Micah, who'd been monitoring the altered security feeds, burst into the room, tablet in hand. "You need to see this." The footage showed Eleanor sneaking into Nathaniel's room while he slept. She took the phone, flipped through folders labeled Phoenix, and snapped photos of every page. Then, with meticulous precision, she returned everything to its exact place. "When was this?" Nathaniel asked, his voice nearly gone. "Last night, right after she left your room." Finn stepped forward, adding, "The secure server logged an internal breach. Someone accessed your treatment protocol from inside the mansion." Nathaniel closed his eyes. 20 years of trust undone in a single night. "Find her," he said, voice like steel. "Now." Eleanor Haynes sat upright in the sealed conference room, as if nothing were out of the ordinary. As the security team escorted her in, Nathaniel was already seated, waiting. Why, he asked, no preamble, no pretense. The professional mask Eleanor had worn for 20 years cracked. She gave a dry, bitter laugh. 23 years, Nathaniel. I gave you my youth, and I compensated you well." He replied. "Money," she scoffed. "I didn't want money. I wanted recognition. I wanted a seat beside you, a part in what you built." Her voice sharpened. "And then you brought in those street kids. You put them in your will, gave them access to everything I spent half my life protecting." Her words cut deep into his trust, but Nathaniel kept his tone calm. "You're working with Blackwell." Eleanor gave a cold smirk. "Curtis recognizes loyalty and competence. He promised me a VP position after the takeover, and more." She pulled out a file. "I have your medical records, treatment plans, insurance, prescriptions." Her voice turned venomous. "You're on your way out. Nathaniel, a dying billionaire entrusting his life to street kids. The board won't stand for it." Nathaniel leaned forward. "You've made a grave mistake, Eleanor. Those children are smarter and more loyal than anyone you've ever known." Her confidence faltered. "It's too late. Lawson already has everything. Your little family is finished." Nathaniel nodded to the security guards. "Then, as of now, you're terminated. Severance will be processed if you sign a non-disclosure agreement." When he returned to the mansion, Nathaniel found the children had already activated the emergency protocol. The twins were re-encrypting the systems. Jace was assessing the damage. "She sent everything," Jace said grimly. "Treatment protocols, financial algorithms, security schematics." "How much was compromised?" Nathaniel asked. "Enough to cause chaos," Finn interjected. "Your treatment plan's at risk. We need to accelerate everything." Nathaniel looked at the children before him. Children who should have been playing sports, reading comics, not fighting betrayal and cancer at the same time. A pang of guilt surfaced. Had he been selfish, dragging them into this war? But before he could speak, Micah stepped forward. Don't even think about giving up. "We knew the risks from the start," Jace said. "More than that," Brody added, "we survived the streets with worse odds than this." Braden nodded, and more importantly, "She made a fatal mistake." "What mistake?" Nathaniel asked. Finn smiled softly. "She only got the decoy data. We always built a dummy version to throw off intruders." For the first time since the betrayal, a spark of hope flickered in Nathaniel's chest. Then he whispered, "We strike back." The next morning, Nathaniel Cross collapsed. The treatment, combined with the mounting pressure, had pushed his body to the edge. An ambulance was called, but the children insisted on taking him to a private hospital they could control. "Sir, I wouldn't recommend this," his private doctor protested as Nathaniel was wheeled into an isolated treatment unit. "But the results are real." Finn interrupted, holding up the latest charts. "Tumor markers are down 18% in just 10 days. The doctor's eyes widened. "That's impossible." "It's unbelievable," Finn corrected. "Not impossible." Nathaniel was temporarily hospitalized. As he began to recover, the group's contingency plan kicked into motion. Jace took over at Cross and Wynn Capital, blocking Curtis Blackwell's maneuvers. Braden and Brody reinforced all digital and physical security systems. Micah took charge of public communications and image control, ensuring no suspicions reached the outside world. And Finn, the youngest but sharpest, focused entirely on refining and monitoring Nathaniel's treatment. Each one took on a role, a burden, and a piece of Nathaniel's heart. Jace, dressed in a tailored suit, stepped into the executive floor of Cross and Wynn Capital. Though the fine fabric masked his origins, his eyes, posture, and quiet confidence still carried the unmistakable edge of a boy who had survived the streets. The board members, those quietly plotting to remove Nathaniel Cross as CEO, now found themselves face to face with a teenager who possessed an alarmingly precise knowledge of corporate law, internal structures, and every contingency Nathaniel had carefully put in place. "Mr. Cross granted me limited power of attorney during his treatment," Jace announced, sliding a legal dossier across the table. "Any attempt to remove him from leadership will trigger a class action suit and a full freeze on all senior shareholder benefits." Meanwhile, Braden and Brody worked non-stop, reinforcing cybersecurity systems and refining the financial algorithm. Then something unexpected happened. Eleanor's betrayal became an advantage. Curtis Blackwell's tech team was wasting time analyzing a decoy algorithm specifically designed to mislead and confuse. And Micah. He painted a new picture, one of humanity and hope. Working with Nathaniel's communications team, he helped craft gentle but powerful press releases. Stories emerged about Nathaniel's ongoing involvement in the company and, more importantly, how he was mentoring 5 gifted children who had risen from the very bottom of society. Photos of the boys visiting orphanages, volunteering alongside Nathaniel, spread like wildfire through major media outlets. A wave of public goodwill began to rise. Meanwhile, Finn barely left the treatment room. In addition to refining every detail of the therapy protocol, he quietly contacted top global physicians, each one thoroughly vetted and compensated handsomely. His uncanny medical intuition combined with relentless resolve began to produce real results. Even the original medical team, once skeptical, had to admit the method was working beyond all expectations. 1 week after hospitalization, Nathaniel opened his eyes surrounded by 5 children sleeping in scattered positions across desks, on sofas, the floor, laptops open and blankets draped over shoulders. He smiled weakly, but fully. This was family, messy, stubborn, exhausted, but never abandoning one another. "Progress report," he rasped. Finn sat up instantly. "You're awake. Your cancer markers are down 30%. The treatment's exceeding all projections." The others stirred one by one, relief shining in their eyes. And Blackwell Nathaniel asked. Jace stepped forward, temporarily contained. "He's scrambling, but every move is being countered. The board is split." "The algorithm," Nathaniel continued. Braden and Brody exchanged a glance and nodded. "Fully operational." Braden confirmed. "Profits are already enough to fund your entire treatment, even for years. And public opinion," he asked Micah. "It's shifting in our favor," Micah said with a smile. "Your community campaigns are gaining traction. People are starting to question Blackwell's motives." Nathaniel looked at the youthful faces in front of him. Children once abandoned in the shadows, now lighting the path ahead for him. "You've done far more than I ever hoped," he whispered. "Because we learned from the best," Jace replied, soft as breath. As Nathaniel regained strength, his resolve only deepened. This wasn't just a fight for survival or for control of a company. This was a battle to prove one truth, that a family, no matter how unlikely, could stand strong in the face of any storm. 2 weeks later, global financial markets began to shake. What started as small shifts snowballed into seismic tremors. Tech stocks tumbled, energy supplies destabilized, and high-risk loans crumbled. "Just as the algorithm predicted," Jace said, spreading out charts over Nathaniel's hospital bed. 3 simultaneous choke points inflated valuations, energy supply chain disruption, and leveraged lending. Nathaniel examined the data, unable to hide his admiration. "And our assets? They were moved 3 days ago." "All safe," Braden confirmed, and Blackwell Nathaniel asked. Brody grimaced. "Exposed?" He poured everything into the sectors collapsing right now. Wall Street reeled. News outlets showed scenes of chaos. Fortunes evaporated. Major firms fell into panic. Except for one. Cross and Wynn Capital, where Jace calmly coordinated it all, with the quiet composure of someone who'd once battled for scraps on the street, and won. Jace, whom the media now called the teenage finance wizard, walked into the executive suite of Cross and Wynn Capital with a calm confidence that disarmed everyone. Cameras captured the moment a teenager discussing strategy with finance directors 3 times his age, and none dared to look down on him. On the 3rd day of the market collapse, Nathaniel Cross was finally strong enough to make a brief public appearance. Micah orchestrated the entire visual presentation lighting, media presence, every step and gesture calculated to ensure Nathaniel still looked like the man in charge, not a victim. "Attorney Lawson is requesting an emergency meeting," the new assistant reported. "He wants to see you, in person." Nathaniel glanced at Jace. "Set it for tomorrow. Here," nodded his office. The next day, Curtis Blackwell arrived stripped of his usual arrogance. The expensive suit couldn't hide the exhaustion from sleepless nights and catastrophic financial losses. Behind him were 3 senior executives men who once scoffed when Nathaniel adopted those street kids. Now, they looked like they'd just walked out of a bankruptcy hearing. "Hello, Nathaniel," Blackwell began, trying to sound composed. "The current market situation is unprecedented." "Oh," Nathaniel replied dryly. "Our models predicted this adjustment weeks ago." Blackwell winced at the word adjustment, a subtle but surgical jab. "We should discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement," he continued. "Perhaps an emergency investment, a partnership. Jace repeated, incredulous. "After you tried to steal the company and used stolen data, that's your idea of collaboration." Blackwell visibly bristled at being challenged by a teenager, but the circumstances forced him to remain civil. "The market is a battlefield. Everyone takes risks." Nathaniel leaned forward, voice slow and steady. "So, let me get this straight. You want me the man you tried to oust, the one you called unstable, the father of those beggars to save your company to save you." One executive cut in, voice urgent. "Without support in the next few days, our company will collapse. Thousands of jobs lost. Retirement funds gone." Nathaniel turned to Jace. "What does the algorithm say about companies with strong ethics and risk management recovery in 8 weeks? Jace answered without hesitation. "If restructured properly, they'll grow again next quarter." The room fell silent. Nathaniel slowly stood up. "I can help, but only on one condition." "Anything," Blackwell said instantly. Nathaniel smiled. "My sons will present the terms, and I suggest you listen very carefully." As Nathaniel exited to take his medication per Finn's strict orders, he heard Jace begin outlining terms that would reshape Cavendish's financial ecosystem. He couldn't help but smile at the poetic irony. The same children once dismissed as burdens were now writing the rules for the very elites who once laughed at them. The following day, at the official meeting, the conditions were presented and left the executives stunned. 50% of the board seats of every bailed-out company. Jace began. "We'll go to individuals with backgrounds in education, community work, or social sciences. 30% of annual profits will fund support programs for disadvantaged youth." Brody added, "Each company must launch full scholarship and internship programs for underprivileged students with potential." Braden continued, "Corporate branding must align with social innovation, not just profit," Micah stated. "And finally," Finn, the youngest, spoke softly but clearly, "and allocate research funding for neglected diseases, illnesses that affect the poor, children, and the forgotten." The executives were speechless. Such force, such clarity, such vision, from 5 children who once slept in alleyways, now teaching moral lessons to those who had looked down on them. From a quiet distance, Nathaniel watched his children do something he never dreamed possible. Change driven not by revenge, but by hope, expires after tomorrow. Jace concluded, closing the final offer before the executives were dismissed. Once the meeting room doors shut, Nathaniel called all 5 boys into his private office. "Do you understand what you're doing?" he asked, not accusing, but solemn. "You're not just saving companies. You're changing an entire system, one that's existed for generations, one that once abandoned us." Jace replied without hesitation, And there are thousands of kids like us, kids who still get left behind by that system. That night, back at the mansion, Nathaniel found Finn sitting alone in the library, something that rarely happened. "What's bothering you?" he asked gently. Finn looked up from his thick medical notes. "They used to mock us, called us names I still can't forget." "That's true." Nathaniel nodded. "And now, we have the power to make them feel that same pain." But Finn's voice held no anger, just an honest, moral question. Is it justice? Nathaniel sat beside him. Maybe, but is that really what we're after? The other four stood quietly at the doorway, listening. "Then what are we after?" Micah asked. Nathaniel looked at each of them, children who had endured wounds no child ever should. "That's the real question. Isn't it? Revenge is easy. Redemption, that's hard. We could do both," Brody suggested, "help them, but still make them pay." "Maybe," Nathaniel admitted, "but if we do, how are we any different from them?" A heavy silence followed. Finally, Jace spoke softly, but with certainty. "On the streets, every day, we had to choose become like the ones who hurt us, or become something better." He stepped into the room. "I choose to be something better." One by one, the other boys nodded. No further discussion was needed. The next morning, the executives returned with signed agreements. No more resistance. They knew they had no other option. As the paperwork was exchanged, Curtis Blackwell approached Nathaniel. "I truly don't understand," he said, "for once. Honestly, you could have destroyed us. After everything I said, everything I did. Why help?" Nathaniel glanced across the room where the 5 boys were reviewing contract terms with the legal team. He gave a quiet reply. "Because I've had excellent teachers." Blackwell left in silence, head bowed. He came seeking leverage and left with a lesson. Nathaniel. He felt lighter. His body was still battling illness, but his spirit had never felt stronger. That evening, the 6 of them, not a billionaire and 5 kids anymore, but a real family, sat around Nathaniel's office, sharing pizza, a perfect contrast to the million-dollar galas of the past, to the future. Nathaniel raised his glass of soda. "To family," Finn corrected, smiling and clinking his cup with Nathaniel's. In the weeks that followed, a quiet miracle began to unfold. The financial crisis slowly subsided exactly as the boys' algorithm had predicted. Not only did Cross and Wynn Capital survive, it led the way out, guiding other companies under ethical restructuring and humanitarian principles. At first, Cavendish's elite mocked the rescue conditions as idealistic nonsense. Now, they began to follow suit. Boardroom meetings that once focused solely on margins began to include new words: mentorship, scholarship, community. Corporate offices, once closed off to anyone without a tailored suit, now welcomed young people with stories like Jace, Brody, and Finn. At a family strategy session, Ethan reported results are better than projected. These social programs aren't just earning goodwill, innovation, and community loyalty are driving profits. And the medical fund? Finn chimed in, barely hiding his excitement. 3 clinical trials just got approved based on the protocol we developed. And the most extraordinary miracle, Nathaniel's health continued to improve. Cancer markers were down over 60%. Doctors, once skeptical, were now rewriting textbooks. "They're calling it the Cross Protocol," Finn said proudly. "It could save thousands of lives." Eleanor, once confident and ambitious, now stood quietly in Nathaniel Cross's office, her voice softer than ever. I made a terrible mistake, she admitted. Blackwell promised me everything and abandoned me when his company collapsed. Nathaniel looked at her. 20 years of loyalty, then betrayal. Part of him still hadn't fully healed. What do you want? Eleanor a chance to make it right, she said softly. Any position. I'm willing to start from the bottom. Nathaniel turned to Jace, who had been silently observing. What do you think Jace thought for a moment, then gave a slow nod. Everyone deserves a second chance. But trust has to be rebuilt from scratch. Nathaniel nodded. There's an opening for a youth program coordinator. It's tough working with kids who are wounded, stubborn. It's nothing like your old job. Eleanor hesitated, eyes wide. Then she nodded. I'll take it. Thank you. Spring returned to Cavendish City, bringing with it a quiet revolution. Media outlets that once mocked Nathaniel's idealistic humanitarian project were now dissecting the groundbreaking model his adopted sons had brought to business and philanthropy. Change didn't come from power or wealth. It came from vision and resolve. 1 year after his terminal cancer diagnosis, Nathaniel Cross stood at the podium of the Cross Youth Innovation Foundation's grand opening. The building, once an abandoned warehouse in the city's poorest district, now gleamed with labs, classrooms, and a residential space for youth transitioning off the streets. When I was told I had 3 months to live, Nathaniel began, his voice strong and clear. I thought it was the end, but it wasn't. It was the beginning. Hundreds listened in silence, from CEOs to doctors, teachers, and former street kids now dressed in button-downs, sitting upright. In the front row sat 5 boys in navy suits, once homeless, now seated with pride, straight-backed and dignified. Medical experts say I survived thanks to a breakthrough treatment. Financial analysts say my company thrived because of a new algorithm and strategy. Nathaniel paused, looking directly at his 5 sons. They're all right, but not enough. What truly saved me and changed everything was that I found a family in the most unexpected place. The launch wasn't just a pinnacle of success. It marked the beginning of an extraordinary journey. The Cross Protocol, initiated by Finn, was now saving thousands of lives worldwide. Braden and Brody's algorithm had reshaped market forecasting and redirected profits toward education, health care, and new opportunities. Micah, with his gifted artistry, had designed the Foundation's entire creative space, a place to ignite imagination in every child, no matter their background. And Jace, no longer the cunning kid from the streets, was now Nathaniel's right hand, partner, and rightful successor. After the ceremony, in the central hub of the new building, Eleanor approached with a group of teenagers. The kids have something to show, she said. A young girl stepped forward, hands trembling as she held out a tablet. We designed an app for teens to find safe housing, emergency health care, and legal services even offline. Nathaniel stepped back, letting his sons take the lead. They began collaborating with the group, no hierarchy. No pretense, just genuine connection among those who understood survival. That night, the Cross family gathered in the library where it all began 1 year before. The board has reached a decision, Nathaniel said, eyes on Jace. You're officially the youngest executive director in the Foundation's history. Really, Jace blinked. People will talk. Nathaniel smiled. Let them. The results will speak for themselves. Jace stood quietly by the tall window. The late afternoon sun casting a warm glow across his shoulders, framing him like a man who had grown up far too soon. Finn approached, holding a folder in his hand. Dad's latest results, he said, grinning, completely cancer-free. It's official. The room fell into a moment of reverent silence. So, what do we do now? Micah asked, looking up from the design sketch he'd been working on. We've accomplished everything we planned, Brody said, glancing around at his brothers. Not quite, Nathaniel replied, his voice slow and thoughtful. He turned to face the boys. No, his sons, the ones he had chosen, and who had chosen him in return. There are still so many children out there, just like you once were. Souls yet to be seen, talents left behind, so much potential still waiting to be awakened. A new project, Braden and Brody asked in unison, eyes lighting up in that familiar spark of excitement. Nathaniel looked around the room, once a house of silence, now filled with laughter, the clicking of keys, rustling papers, and the sound of life. He took a deep breath and smiled. Not a new project. The boys looked up, a new chapter, and in that moment they understood. No longer was it about surviving illness, no longer about the fear of death or betrayal. Now it was about building, teaching, planting seeds of hope. The Cross Mansion, once a monument to solitude, had become the headquarters of change. Every room no longer just a place to live, but a hub of creation innovation labs, research studios, libraries, and transitional housing for youth in need. The seasons passed, but the fire inside them never dimmed. Jace, now the youngest executive director of the foundation, expanded the model across states. Braden and Brody completed the second generation of their smart algorithm, not only predicting markets, but analyzing social needs, managing public health crises, and helping allocate educational resources. Micah created a visual library network where any child could learn to draw, imagine, and create through images instead of words. And Finn, he became the head of a medical research center for underserved communities, a doctor, once a patient, now a healer. 1 year passed, then another. But every time Nathaniel looked into his son's eyes, he remembered that night in the alley, the place where fate didn't end a life. It began 6 lives, forever intertwined. Sometimes family isn't what we're born into. It's who stands with us when the world turns away. In a mansion once filled with silence, laughter now echoes. A man who once ruled empires now builds futures, not with wealth, but with love. 5 boys once forgotten by the world became the reason one man chose to fight for life, and together they built more than a legacy. They built hope. If this story moved you, made you think, or simply made you feel, let it remind you, even in our darkest moments, we're all capable of choosing something better. Thank you for watching. If you believe more people need to hear stories like this, give it a thumbs up. Share it with someone you care about. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story that matters. We'll see you in the next one.